And then I will put you all on spotlight. Hello to everyone who is watching on YouTube. Simon, can I hand over to you to launch everyone with the key questions?
Where were the key questions? Sorry.
Well, very simply, what questions are alive in your space? What
Yeah.
are really at the forefront for you today? We sent you all a quick note asking you to have a think about this. They can be really wide. They can be covering, again, a very wide diversity of issues. Just to remind you, this is for us to come together around those questions and to understand what is alive in that space today of those humans that are working on, relating and building communities and maybe peace building. Maybe that's the first one. Should peace building be part of that sphere of regeneration? Okay, I'm gonna stop and let you guys take
Yeah, thanks. Please, you can all be unmuted, and yes, just if you can share the questions you brought with you. It's a great time to share, particularly anything which is going to lead on to this idea of finding the shared questions. So please go ahead as you're ready.
I can see Rob looking at his list of 100 questions. Not at all.
I suppose the first thing that's just struck me as what was just spoken now is should peace building be in here? A huge subject and very topical, of course, for the last few decades. Absolutely. For me, if I'm building relationships, if I'm investing in community and projects, I need to know that when we go through difficult times and challenging moments, we can still trust each other. We come out the other side with some kind of built trust and understanding that, it's not all plain sailing, and I can trust you when things get difficult. And that, for me, serves to deepen my connection and my willingness, of course, to engage with you, whoever, and the project itself. So being with challenges, understanding something about the language or ways of dealing with keeping the peace. And the peace isn't necessarily, as I say, or I feel fluffy or good or like this. It's also being with the difficult, dark stuff and continuing to be present with and available, let's say. And importance also in that, just to end my little soundbite, would be the solidarity of the people around us in those communities or projects who would support the active engagement with peacemaking and not sort of be the peanut crunching crowd on the side and watch how this develops and thinks I'm not included or I'm not involved. So absolutely essential.
Thank you, Rob. I think I'll carry on from here. Trust was the first thing that came to me. I don't believe in peacemaking as a first step. Peacemaking implies conflicts, and there are communities where there aren't any conflicts, they're just not connected. So for me personally, it's about, the key question is how might we generate trust among ourselves? That might be the question that would come up for me. So I would approach it in lots of different ways. And I'm coming from a perspective of collapse. I believe that we're already collapsing as a systems and society. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of it's already a disaster. So how do we trust one another in situations of survival, of the old paradigm of competition? Yeah, so it's all about trust. That's the key question for me right now, is how might we trust one another in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. There may be conflict, there may be not. It might just be very quiet. Yeah, people who've lived in the same street and have never talked to one another, as is still quite common around the world. Yeah. So how might we learn to trust one another? That's me.
Maybe I can relate to the term of what you said, Caroline, about the paradigms, and it doesn't relate so much maybe to peace building or trust, but one thing or one question I'm sitting with at the moment is that in my research I look a lot at the difference between a mechanistic paradigm and a more relational paradigm, and how the mechanistic paradigms, which kind of forces us into this competition and basically cuts the world into pieces, versus a relational paradigm which sees everyone as interconnected. And one of the most fascinating things I came across within the last year or so was that there's quite a lot of research, maybe some of you are familiar with Ian McGilchrist, who looks at how our left brain hemisphere is very mechanistic versus our right brain hemisphere, which is thinking very much in relational terms and seeing in German we say Gestalt, so seeing the whole. And one question I have at the moment is, if these different paradigms, these mechanistic paradigms, is situated in one part of our brain, and this relational paradigm might be situated more in the other part of our brain. One question is, how can these two coexist at the same time? And also, and how far are these paradigms or worldviews that we operate from coming from a real embodied physical perspective? And then if it's an embodied perspective, also maybe into our extended body, so our surroundings, and how far do they shape our paradigms? And is there a way to integrate these very, very different strands?
I love that question. And just to add to that question a little bit, it's you got to the body part, because the left and right hemispheres of our brain is just the seat of the intellect, and there's the sensorial, intuitive, emotional body that you just were like referring to at the end there too. So that's the question I'm really sitting with too, is we in this community here and in this regenerative kind of landscape are still really focused, or the attention is more on our human to human person relationships. And I'm just really curious how any of you are thinking about or feeling into what it means to be in relationship with the ecology you are a part of, and then how your relationships are informed by that, from person to person, because we do have the agency and ability to communicate with words and written words as well. But the question is what's beyond that, and how can we use that question to invoke and lean into not just a worldview or cosmology, but a sensorial space of relationship with the rest of nature. What does that look like, and what does that bring up for you? How can we normalize relationality with the rest of the natural living world, to the degree that talking about nature doesn't immediately separate humanity from this abstract notion of nature, because we are nature too.
Yeah, really beautiful contributions. And I just want to pick up on, this the thing about paradigms, and specifically how do the kind of dominant existing paradigms show up in us and in our actions and behavior, and particularly how does that manifest when we are living in community? And following on from that, it's how can we hold each other when we're in community, in that process of kind of examining that and unlearning, and repatterning. And the questions that come up when we kind of come into community but bring these kind of paradigms that are in us with us, and what happens when there's these like frictions, when we bump against each other. Yeah, and what's the role of community in really holding that ontological development.
I'd just like to follow on a little bit. I think inspired from what Joe was saying about, well, for me, I interpret it as place. And for me, place has a very large importance, since it's the location that we are existing in, and therefore part of. And my question would be, I mean, if I look at in more indigenous kind of societies, that the place is extremely important, because they've usually been there for a long time. And I observe in the Western world a lot of movement, particularly at this time. So people losing roots and connections with their land and with their place. So my basic outstanding question at the moment is how do we keep people together? So there may be answers for what brings us together, but what keeps us together would be my question. And I think something around land and place is missing very much. I hope.
I've been exploring the concept of a new togetherness. I don't know what that means, but I have a sense that we've never really learned to be together in our civilization. You know, if you look at the whole history of wars and conflicts and conquest, you know. So that's been what I've been reflecting on for the last 2 years, is how might we be together in ways, or learn to be together in ways that we've never been before. So that maybe mediation, dialogue, and whatever we've tried over the last 100 years, just looking at just the last 100 years, may last a bit longer. I don't know. You know, what does that mean, together, being together? Yeah, but yeah, how are we together? How might we be together in ways that are truly regenerative? I don't know what that means either, but that might be a question.
I'd like to speak on what Rob just said about how do we stay together. And from what I've witnessed from Indigenous cultures is a strong identity. Really, how do we work together in a system where we all, or the system is all revolving around the identity that everyone can feel a part of and relate to.
So this thing about how do we stay together, I might be taking it a couple of steps back, but this thing of how do we stay together is something really important to me. There have been places where I've been, which have taken me to some really nice moments of integration. But then that integration brings out other facets of me that need to be integrated. And to process that communally is not possible in every single space, because our cultures are different, our tolerances are different. And when that happens, when you bring something kinky, as they may say, or you might want to fight, or that you might need to address something that is not very peace and love way, it needs a little of aggravation to get across. Most of the places don't hold you well enough.
And listen, people in the fishbowl, please feel free to just elaborate or feedback, or just try elaborate any questions which you feel coming up from the others in the fishbowl.
Well, thank you both for those questions that you just brought in, or responses. The thing that came up with that in the form of a question is, especially with the multitude of cultural contexts with which us humans come from, scattered around this globe, is I guess like this wondering into, if we're all striving towards, moving towards welcoming in this more regenerative collective energy, what might the really basic, mundane daily practices be for us to communally participate together with that sense of belonging, and perhaps with a sense of devotion? And this is just truly an open question, and just to bring in the more than human companions, the multi-species, you know, ecology we're a part of. I'm wondering if through this question, you know, are there ideas any of you have about what it might look like to like, again, bring back that mundane, the non-sexy or cool, but just like the simple practices of care and yeah, ceremony and ritual towards this sense of belonging with each other, and with this different way of thinking, feeling, and being, what that might look like. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you again for your ideas and questions.
Nicole, did you want to share? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah. I hear themes of relations, trust, ecology, and this question of more rather like a general desire for trust and right relation, and extending, you know, between us as humans, but also between our environment. And I just have very simple thoughts around that, in that it's so much easier to trust people that you know and people that you have deep bonds with, and that there's relationship, and that you're also based on something that isn't scarcity but stability. And I think those kinds of bonds and relationships and like ways of like channels for value to flow happens more at a local scale, and like small networks of micro solidarity, as we might call it, and in community, and from there I think it becomes easier to experiment with ways of relating that can then translate to the like global peacemaking and the larger issue to tackle.
So
Yeah,
just to this thing that happens when you have common language that you start speaking when you go into a community or you're doing a course, that enables that micro solidarity or that common place as well for you to hold your hopes and aspirations through that. Because now in this world where people don't understand the depth at which we need to work, you have a communication language where you can express it to someone at the level and depth that you have to work. And there are other people looking for that language, and you've learned it together. Now, before you can explain it to others, there is a community who's already, you have the capacity to express what needs to be expressed now. So that is also part of coming together and keeping together.
Yeah, I don't know, and I hear some of that as we need a shared language, and we're kind of developing one. I feel like. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of ideas that have been probably floating around in different parts of the world, but they haven't necessarily reached my part of the world or something. And so I'm learning, like, what is regeneration? It's kind of that's an example of, I think, trying to explore a new concept that we're going to share, and without being able to share the concept, we can't communicate, kind of. And I feel like we like the place-based stuff is very important. And we have lots of place-based things, right? I mean, we have cities and countries and farms and land that we own. And I mean, it's not like we don't have them. I feel like one of the things that's new in my thinking about them is that they need to be tied to kind of a life system. That there's the place and living systems are connected in a way that they haven't necessarily been in my mind. So I don't know, Carol Stanford calls them life sheds, I think, and I'm going to start using that term, I think, more often. But I'd say Simon and Andrea, the gathering of tribes conversations have been very helpful to me in trying to consolidate some of these ideas, and so I've been thinking about bioregions kind of as the life shed entity that's kind of, if I were going to put my energy somewhere, I want it to be organized within a bioregion. And that there is a notion of the bioregions having an emerging identity, right? That the people within the bioregion understand that they're in the bioregion, and that might mean something, and that's a critical stage, I guess, in evolution. And it's an emergent thing. Like, as we have conversations like this and people talk about these things, then our awareness becomes greater, and eventually there'll be some, I don't know, phase transition, and the bioregion will become self-aware. And I was thinking, in the United States, we've seen a number of events recently. You guys are going to have another one in September, but there's been one around the bioregion in the northwest of the United States and North America, around the Lake Ontario. There's been one in the Port of Maine, around Portland, Maine, and these are been people convening with the notion of the bioregion as kind of the organizing concept. And that feels to me like an exciting step, and it feels like, oh, maybe this is what emergence looks like, in this kind of space. And then I also just wanted to point at the chat. I'm going back to old literature, but the notion between the Karas and the Grand Falloon as kind of our sense of identity. It makes me think that there's a tension between kind of a good identity and bad identity, or something, or meaningful identity and not meaningful identity that's useful.
Yeah, so I'd love to just bridge that a little bit. When I spoke about place, Kelsey referred to it, but then was very specifically talking about a shared identity with the people. So my curiosity was, would you be able to elucidate a little bit what she means, or what she experiences as this shared identity, and how it's connected to the place, or not? I'm curious about that. Since David was now talking about the bioregions, and I'm wondering, that's another question that sits in me. People are already in regions. Do we come together in the regions, or do we relocate? I mean, this is another question, but I'm curious to hear from Kelsey again.
I'll put you back in, Kelsey. Here you are.
Yeah, shared identity. Feeling of something familiar with the way that we interact with one another, and something that the individual can relate to. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a specific place, but it can be like just like a culture that you're familiar with. And I see that happening on a global scale of, for example, like the digital nomad culture. There's like a familiar culture of places where people can travel to and have a space where there's like shared values of, this is how a co-working space functions, or like, this is how our farm to table restaurant functions. It's a sense of culture identity. But also more specifically with regions and identity, especially in indigenous cultures, like the identity and language and the connection to the land. Someone mentioned the connection to the land. That is extremely important for creating a sense of identity as well. So I guess it just depends on the kind of culture that you're creating, and what resources you have in that culture, whether it's dispersed or directly in relation to the land. For example, this mochila I'm wearing that's made out of lana, which is sheep wool, it's very integral for the culture because they have the shared identity that this is something that they do. All of the women know how to do this practice. They know the essence of it, and it connects them on a level that is so far beyond. I want to pass to Nicole.
Yeah, I just have this very playful interpretation of this because it's so clear to me that we're missing really significant symbols of regeneration and shared identity and shared language. And so the question for me is like, okay, what new words do we mean? What new symbols do we mean? Like the recycling sign is a universal sign for recycling, but like we're missing that same iconography for regeneration. And I think of also like there's this movie that's set in a dystopian world where like the rebellion like takes on a certain symbol to like, you know, signify that they're in support of this movement. And so like cultural indicators like that, as well as like I think of also memetics, so like creating cultural memes that also like allow us to share and to connect with others who support the philosophy of regeneration, understand concepts of, you know, being in relation with the ecology, understanding indigeneity and sense of place and connection and right relation, and all of that. Like, okay, then maybe I would love for all of us to like understand what words we're missing or what icons we're missing that tell that compelling story and that can unite us. Just like I think Jessica said in the comments about the network state, like people are transcending borders right now and not based on knowledge or ethnicity, but ethos. And like, okay, I know some people who are working on the regenerative network state, like learning how can we also build autonomous parallel systems that we disagree with, and rather than try and like fix those systems that we don't like so much, that don't work for us. So based on like these ethos, like how can we rally around certain symbols and certain language? So that's my question as well. Emergent.
Maybe I could just jump in for a second. So I love hearing all these questions, and what occurs to me is, you know, these are all different, really different. And the question that arises for me is, well, okay, actually an observation is, well, you might be in any one of these states, having any one of these questions at any time. So the question that arises to me is, what are the tools that we need to manage ourselves in these many contexts? And what are the like personal tools? What are the skills? And then what are the ones that you know surround us, like this kind of meeting? What is this for? How do we do it? How do we learn from it? How do we act as individuals? Which of yourself do you bring into the meeting? For what purpose? How do you deal with somebody who's speaking your language, or maybe someone who doesn't? And how do you relate? So that question around tools and who we are and what we bring seems to be a huge question for me.
Yeah, one question that is coming up for me and that I've been sitting with is kind of how do we interface with, I guess, like people or communities that are not part of our community. And of course, like any community needs some level of cohesion and a shared language and culture, but then we also don't want a community to be something that is like an isolated bubble that doesn't interact with anything that's in its environment. And so it's that question of how can we hold the tension between welcoming people who are not part of the community in some way, or how can we, and at the same time, like, not being insular and isolated, and what is the right relationship? How can a community be kind of porous in the right way, so that it is interfacing and interacting with the world, but at the same time it doesn't take on too much dissonance that it kind of breaks.
I personally love this question about tools, because I think that's my main area of research. What are the tools for connection, right? Not only the tools, but what are the aims of connections? What do we want to connect with? We're talking about connecting with community, maybe connecting to that sense of oneness, the whole world. Let's just be in one really hippie tribe around the whole world, and what are those tools, right? But I think that the main important connection is the connection with the self, with myself, with what I really am, right? I am this person that is shaped around, that is just behaving socially in some kind of way and working here and that, or is that something that I just generating from my ecosystem and building up this ego that is there trying to defend whatever myself is, So for me, the main connection, the main tool for connection is meditation. I guess is breathing. Breathe, just breathe. I breathe and then I am, right? And that's the first tool, I guess. Then community living, community as a way of living is an amazing tool for connecting with our surrounded, with our local places, with people surrounded, or rituals. We need rituals as tools for connection. We were here speaking about developing a language, but we also should be able to communicate without words. We can do that. And I think that rituals gave us that in a really deep and meaningful way, and also even aggregating more to what was discussed about
I'm technically still on a call, but like,
identity. And
keep going.
And what else? And then at a global tool for global connections, and with religions, guys. And with building up new religions that can just inspire people to all that what we are doing, or festivals, or this gathering of tribes itself is a connection tool.
So warm data labs,
or
warm data labs, or people need people by Nora Bateson. Those are a toolkit. That toolkit helps you go away from command and control into just accepting whatever's happening, like whatever's happening right now over here. It is a way of doing that over there. This is stepping into a new paradigm tool. But I'm going to bring it back to language for a second. And then there is John Fullerton, and John Fullerton G has this 8 principles. And he teaches you how to look through that lens. Piece by piece, piece by piece. And then you have Bayo Akumulafe, who gives you these new concepts and new languages to look at the world in new lenses. In some places, you adopt the lenses like this. In some places, you have to integrate the lens. So the structure of the language of how it takes shape in you, because we have already evolved beings. And now we are trying to harness something in not evolved beings, I'm being wrong with that. We're educated people. So we're not children learning something from scratch in a community. We are reintroducing or rewilding ourselves, as someone would say. So how does the structure of the tool that we design transition into our way of being and integrating and learning? That needs to be tended to as well. And I think I was able to do this with John Fullerton's 8 Principles of Regenerative Economics, in which right relationship is one of them, where slowly and slowly you start to look at, in every single thing, you can look at those 8 principles. If those 8 principles are in alignment, it's like a story, and then you add more facets to that story, and then you can see more layers and more layers. You can add more context and see the nuance from any single story or any single instance. That would be another way of how do you construct the language and the tool.
Thanks. Thanks, King. I just want to give people time to focus on what are the questions are here. If we can kind of move away now from like really like what are the shared questions. I mean, if you think of the answers we're looking for here are what are the questions. So
the question is,
and if you like to sort of try and sense in also, this is an invitation to everybody, try and sense into like just thinking around, listening to all the questions we've heard, like what are the questions which are coming up as key questions which are kind of shared by everybody. That's what we'd really love to hear if you can manage it. So that would be great. Thanks.
If we are trying to do this group think, and then if you're trying to resonate with everyone, then even the lone actors from amongst us who might be figuring out something that is odd, that is also going to be normalized. So that's one flaw that is there in this way. But the question I was going to pose before this was, how do we know that people who are trying to show the sign or do this or that are not faking it? We are still in the early phase, but people are already adding these to their LinkedIn bios just for the sake of it, to get the right job or get the right credentials. How do we, whatever we design, whatever we put into place, how does it go beyond fake virtue signaling? Virtue signaling is a question that I have right now, and I'd like to be taken off if that's giving more space.
Yeah, for me, more about the questions are the feelings, right? What are the feelings that we want to share, that we want to inspire? What are the behaviors, the values? It's this thing about faking it. Is faking it important or not? I don't know. Personally, for me, it's better to fake a good behavior than doing a bad one. Maybe this phrase of fake it till you make it is something valid. What more questions are there? I mean, how to be deep and fun at the same time. I mean, we are in a world that if we really want to connect with, we need to go deep. We need to go deep, but society is kind of deep reluctant. They are kind of allergic to deepness, but maybe we can be fun at the same time. I don't know. How can we integrate different traditions, different creeds into a single common narrative and unify them all? Another question. How can we want from our individuality? That's the biggest question. If you want more question, I can continue.
Yeah, I heard more frequently what is our common language? That was the question. What do we share with the language that we can relate to? I heard about place. I heard about tools. But if I pare it down even more, it's like, what do we share? And then how do we come together to know what we share? And I suppose I go back to the days I was studying primitive survival skills. And human beings need, four or five basic things: shelter, water, warmth, food, possibly companionship. So I would imagine that most human beings, if not all, would share those common needs. And from there, I guess there's a conversation with more refinements. So the question is, what is the way that brings us together to be able to communicate? What language is it that we share? I could maybe give an answer, but I won't. But that's the question. What do we share? What is it we're sharing?
Yeah, and I want to build on that. And for me, what I've heard and has resonated a lot is related, I think, in fact, it was your question, Rob, like what keeps us together. And to me, there's also a question there around what are we binding ourselves to? And religion comes into this. And I think like in our kind of culture in the West, like this kind of part of the paradigm is the individualism that I think Gustavo also talked about, this kind of mentality that I can pick and choose and I can come and go as I please. And I'm wondering how that fits with the question of really binding yourself to something and what it is that we choose to bind ourselves to. And in turn that feeds back to what keeps us together.
I just have this strong story just coming in. I just want to add, I haven't mentally worked out what it means right now, but to say this, I was one time in Dahab, and sometimes I would go to one of the shops along one of the streets, and I turned up at a particular time, and the shopkeeper was not in his shop. He was sitting outside on the ground, on the dirt, eating something. And he saw me and he beckoned me over. I must have been in his shop 3 times. And he motioned to me to sit on the ground. So I sat with him, and he broke his food in half and gave it to me. And this blew my mind. I'd never known such a thing, of course, walking around in suburbs in the UK. Never such a thing could happen. It's just a little story that comes to me. It's just amazing. Want to add that.
Thank you, Rob. I'm just gonna jump in quickly because it's really interesting you're bringing this story right now, because I was about to jump in saying, well, actually what used to bring us together was need, right? It was necessity. We are together because we're social animals and we need to be together to survive, or needed. And I feel like we're at a point now where we don't necessarily need to be together to survive, yet we're realizing that the lack of that social bond that was built into our literal DNA out of need, right, for our species, is still there somewhere. And so this person didn't need to break their food into 2 to share it with you, Rob, obviously. But then what was it that kind of that was the source of that momentum, right? And of that energy. And it's not necessity. And if it's not necessity, then what is it? So to the question that we can maybe come around together, mine would be, or my understanding would be, yeah, if it's not necessity, then what is it? I don't know. And I wonder, just to finish, I wonder if it's more about us finding excuses to come together around something, anything. It doesn't matter. We do that every day. We work together, not because we want to, because it's an excuse to hang out, right? and we share passions together, not because we want to, because we just want, I don't really care about volleyball. I just want to be with people, obviously, and so on and so forth, right? And so what if we just recognize that those are all excuses and none of them matter, and what really matters is the human connection that comes out of it? What would happen then? Yeah.
I really sympathise with that, and I thank you so much, Audrey. Gave me a lot of pleasure also thinking about that. But I come back to one of my original questions was what keeps us together. Since I was a traveller only in that moment. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. I mean, and I was thinking just to pop in and say, it does feel like there's this real common theme of connection is what we all need, whatever our circumstances. So if that's the case, the question then is, what can we do? What practices can we develop and focus on, which actually maintain that, but build and maintain and enhance and develop those connections? I think that's a really, that comes to my heart. And I think it is also very relevant to this whole theme of relating.
Yeah, and to look back what you just said, Simon, to what Gustavo was sharing, I wonder to what extent are the practices the tools that we were talking about, right? I mean, Gustavo, you were bringing in this idea of rituals as well. But yeah, I just wonder how much this is just the same talking about, actually, just different words for it, right? Or different adaptations throughout human history. Yeah.
Personally, I'm with different adaptations. Like Victor, actually, this guy here, he borrowed me a book about the disappearance of rituals. This guy there. By the way, this was the most fast-reading book I ever read since my times of Harry Potter, I think. And yeah, that remarks a lot that it doesn't matter what the ritual is, but it matters actually doing it, practicing, repeating it, right? And binding people together in doing that, and bringing the importance of the unspoken language among them. So as rituals just per se, it's a mean of connection. Ritual is a mean of connections to whatever is sacred to us, to abstract ourselves from this compulsion of consumption, of capitalism that the world is living, and we are doing everything because we need to get money, because we need to work. No, let's separate a little bit of that. Let's do things because it's connecting us with people, because it's bonding us together, because it has a deep sense of meaning, even if it's not bringing anything tangible back. No bullshit, of course it's bringing something back to us, but maybe it's intangible. Maybe we don't feel it at the moment, but just the fact of sharing that and repeating and giving a ritualistic and even religious practice through that is what is bringing us in the universal flow of life, let's say. So yeah, whatever kind of rituals, we shouldn't be caring about this or that. As long as you do a ritual and you share it with your people, that's the thing.
Excuse me. I loved everything you were just saying, especially the part about Harry Potter and your reading of that. Because now I have to read this book too, that hopefully Victor is sharing in the chat at some point. But just building a little bit off of, or continuing on rather, from what you were saying, I jotted this down. It's not so much a question, but there's questions in it. And it was building relational community while not necessarily contributing to more content. making goals for qualitative manifestations, room for celebration, grief, and care, so we can gather together with nothing more than a process of being together, having that be the outcome, right? So it's like, yeah, what are these rituals and ways for us to relate to each other and place, especially with the ecology and the richness of community that is largely absent from the regenerative movement, in that, like, the sacredness of all life and water and place and the animals and plants and other beings. That to me is the, like, juiciest kind of space that is still not untapped, but I think can support the regenerative movement in its complexity, is us developing these processes, these daily practices with the world. And there's just such opportunity, because it is, I hesitate to use the words, but it is spiritual, you know, and there is these contexts of a greater than, you know, that's involved. But those words don't have to necessarily be present for us to support invoking and engaging and enticing people into experiential processes together, right? With place, and then connecting us globally as well. Because we can all hug a tree as a very base means of connection, right? But how can we do these daily practices that build sense of belonging beyond the human domain into the global relational context of a living world too, right? Because that can be a part of us coming together and celebrating as well. I don't know if the AI is blocking out this large noise behind me, but apologies, as my open air meeting room has a little bit of loudness behind it.
No,
Anyways,
it's great. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I love this kind of stuff, and I do hope you know, we create some actions, you know, and goals and tangibles out of this too, right? So thank you all.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Joe, and Gustavo. And I think we are. I'm definitely hearing a question about what are the rituals, what are the stories, and that isn't going to have a simple answer, obviously, because it's going to depend on place, and it's going to depend on individuals as well, and culture. And so there's a great, lovely diversity which we can inquire into. So, Audrey, do you want to? Are we ready? Is there any more things here, or do you want to go into the checkout now?
I think we can go into the checkout. That's okay.
Great, thanks.
Everyone. So the checkout is very simple. Let's put us all back. Hi, everyone again. Sorry, one second. Everyone. So we're just gonna do one question. So I'm gonna do a roundtable, call everyone one after the other, and I would like everyone to just share the one question that you remain with at the end of this more than an hour spent together. I will just follow the order on my screen, and I'll start with Joe.
Thank you, Audrey, and everyone. The question, I suppose, is how do we just keep this communal space going? And that's really the truth, because this is a process, and the questions are so rich that I believe the actions will manifest from these. So I'm just questioning how we can support each other and making more and more spaces available like this. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Joe. Rob?
I'm with the first time I really sat in council, I asked myself, where is this coming from? What is the source of this? And I'm with this question, what's the source of our question here? That's it.
Thank you. Simon?
How can we do this even better? And I just love it. So I really want to hear from everybody how we can get into this space and bring people together even better. Thanks.
Thank you. Elisa?
For me, it's how can we build, maintain, and grow connection?
Thank you. King Kong? I don't know what your name is. Maybe it's King Kong.
So how do you work on, we've talked about how do we work on all levels, all the leverage points together? How do we work on all the leverage points that Donald Meadows shares together?
Thank you. Andrew?
Thank you. And so my question is, like, how do we develop and practice this mental and emotional fluidity that allows us to play these roles?
Thank you. Victor?
How do we involve the other ways of knowing into our engagement with these ideas, the very key different dimensions? How do we bring that into our way of engaging with these questions and those questions?
Thank you. I'll go next. How do we bring the flexibility of nature into the development and maintenance of our relationships? Gustav?
How do we inspire for enabling individual, community, and global rituals?
Thank you. Yuri? I don't know if you're still there. Yes, you are. Great.
Yeah, very good. But how do we wake people up? Because people are here, they know all this. They know, they appreciate the common humanity and they want to connect. What we do with the people, beaten down, don't trust themselves. And if you don't trust yourself, how do you build trust? That's my question. Thank you. Enjoyed it. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks everyone for creating this space. Very grateful for all of you to understand and run this experimentation with us and give time to the questions and not just to the answers. We have some sort of non-tested intuition, I guess, that this is very important. So appreciate to take you all on this journey with us. As a reminder, this is all as a preparation for us to be together in person and dive much deeper into all those questions and bring answers at the Gathering of Tribes in September. The next episode of Questioning Regeneration will be in 2 weeks at the same time, and it will be focusing on regenerative organizations and leaderships with some great initiators again. And I think that's it from me. Simon, do you want to add a closing word?
No. Thank you. Apart from thank you everybody for participating and being patient with the process and learning and getting into the process, which is really appreciated. And I love the questions that have come out of it. Please, if you sense any more shared questions which can contribute to the gathering, please send them in. We'll work them in. If it suddenly occurs to you later on tonight or tomorrow morning, that would be lovely as well.
Thank you, Simon. I'm going to stop recording now.